All right, y'all. So in this video, we're going over Tim Wise. He is exposing the divide and conquer strategy that was done in the United States. Y'all know how we do. We always pushing health, wealth, better understanding of self, exposing the corruption. Let's get it. Let's get it.
The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish.
Don't that sound like what's going on in the black community right now? We just killing each other. I'm gonna let him cook, but watch. He getting us something.
Right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff.
In that sea of silence, where most who are called white would look away, there is yet one amongst us, a white American, who's been standing by blacks in their unending pain, standing out as a voice against the pervasive and oppressive impact on marginalized communities. His name is none other than Tim Wise.
Because if you know the history of the whole concept of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland. Highlanders and Lowlanders just fought the hell out of each other. So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured like many poor Europeans for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. The whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't.
So this is where your Officer Tatum's come in, where they put people in place just to keep order, cause dysfunction. Let me let him keep cooking because he's cooking right now.
You want to kill them all. You have to do the work yourself. You have to build your own levee, build your own house. No, pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all, we're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination.
So you see how they use white people as well? They think that because they see black people struggling and going crazy, that's why it's so important to have black people looking like chaos, because it makes white people feel safe in their positions and not attacking the elites.
But we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down.
Tim Wise from Nashville, Tennessee, is not like the everyday white American. He never did feel less concerned, nor did look away from the sufferings of Black Americans. Bravely, this respectable individual has devoted so much effort in exposing just how the American system was designed to work against Black Americans.
So they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy, not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the West. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No, they're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it, if I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low-income person. But they were told, if these people are freed, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border? Is that really what we believe? We know that if that border is closed, it isn't going to be closed to capital. It isn't going to be closed to goods. If you have a border that can be crossed by capital looking for the highest return on investment or goods looking for the highest price, but labor is chained to its country of origin, how is that going to work to the benefit of working people? By definition, it doesn't. By definition, it immiserates the working class. Divide and conquer.
By breaking ranks, Mr. Wise inspired others to re-examine their own biases against Black people and set their paths straight. His unconventional perspective shed light on hidden truths.
But the best example of all, perhaps, in the contemporary era, in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina, here you have two communities that were the most hard hit. Lower Ninth Ward, mostly black community, 94% African-American, about 40% official poverty rate, heavy working class community. And right across the canal, St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, 95% white, also working class, high levels of poverty, economically very similar. And at the end of the day, in those first few days of September 2005 more similar than they probably would have realized. Because when those levees broke, they all got their stuff jacked. They all got their stuff destroyed. But if you had asked white folks in Chalmette, and I've done it, who was the cause of the problems in the greater New Orleans area prior to that flooding, they would have pointed across that canal at those black folks, wouldn't have called them black folks, and would have said, there, that's the problem. 70% of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the...
So y'all see, that's the same thing what's going on today, right now. This is why this is a Psyop program that they got going on. You hear white people online blaming black people for all of the problems in the hood. This is by design, and I hope people wake up.
Irony. The irony is that while they were blaming black people for their problems, while they were blaming black people for the conditions of the greater New Orleans area in which they lived, nobody was paying attention, least of all they, to the fact that these white elite politicians, either in Baton Rouge or in Washington, whose job it was to secure those levees, to make sure that levy funds were spent in the proper way and that they were spent at all, those mostly white and mostly elite politicians did nothing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just the black folks in the lower ninth ward they didn't care about. They really couldn't have given a rat's ass about those poor and working class white folks either. And yet, when the people of Chalmette, people of St. Bernard Parish got back into session, first time they had a city council meeting, parish council meeting after the flooding, the lights aren't even on yet. The water isn't even hooked up. And the first order of business was to pass an ordinance saying that you couldn't rent property in St. Bernard Parish to anyone who wasn't a blood relative. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before, but now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a damn good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that, that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply, you can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now, they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatening, they got rid of the ordinance, but my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time, and march on Baton Rouge and march on DC and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
Supporting Tim Wise's claims, several studies show that racial disparities in income, wealth, education, imprisonment, and health outcomes persist to this day. The beliefs and narratives that Black Americans have about institutional harm have long been studied by scholars in the health and social sciences and the humanities. Narratives about how institutions were designed to hold Black people back also surfaced in several of the online focus groups Pew Research Center conducted with this study just last year. To measure the prevalence of these narratives of mistrust, they would conduct a survey of 4,736 Black adults in the U.S. from September 12th to September 24th, 2023. First respondents were asked if they had ever heard a series of statements about how U.S. institutions might intentionally or negligently harm Black people. Respondents were then asked if they thought these harms were also happening to Black people today. Here are some key findings about Black Americans' beliefs in institutional mistrust. 76% of Black adults say Black public officials today are singled out to be discredited in a way that doesn't happen to white public officials. 76% say police today do very little to stop guns and drugs from flooding Black communities. 74% say Black people are more likely than white people to be incarcerated because prisons want to make money on the backs of Black people today. 67% of Black Americans say businesses today target marketing of luxury products to Black people in order to put them into debt. 55% of Black adults say secret and non-consensual medical experiments, like the Tuskegee study, are happening to Black people today. 55% of Black adults say the government today encourages single motherhood and the elimination of Black men from Black families.
So as you can see, this stuff is still going on today. All right, I wanted to show y'all this. This was an important part of the video that I wanted to show y'all. And they have marches that's going on later today. It's about almost 3 o'clock in the morning right now. They got marches that's going on today that's definitely psyops. Anything that doesn't align with Tim Wise, John Brown, all of the guys who were fighting against the divide and conquer mechanism, they already been sold and they're already brainwashed. And we got it on the Democrats doing that on the side. That's why you see the crime in our cities and you see people saying, hey, blame it on the black people. This is why Officer Tatum is so popular how he is with white people, because he makes it, and I'm not going to say white people, I'm going to say white conservatives. He pushes that narrative to keep the divide going. They're never going to talk how Tim Wise is going in and going into the real problem. Tim Wise is talking about the real problem. So let me know what y'all think about this, man. I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace and love.
You are totally dependent on other people to take care of your needs because you don't have those roots sunk into the ground. To have a community, you must have three things to have a community in it. You must have a wholly independent economic structure that can provide goods, service, products, and things for your own people, and jobs and tax bases for your own people. You should at least control 4 basic things. You should be trying to control water, food, medicine, and energy to be able to survive.
Here we got Mr. Pollock. He had a cornfield. He took advantage of a free water test from us, and this is what we found in this water. We found sulfur, we found hardness, and we solved these problems with an easy fix of 2 tanks. So get your free water test today. Stay blessed. Click the link below.